Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to begin by recognizing that Manitoba Music was founded on Treaty 1 territory, which is the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And I'd like to recognize the strong Inuit community here in Manitoba. Manitoba Music respects the treaty in which our organization resides, and we commit to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in the spirit of collaboration and reconciliation. My name is Alex Sani. I'm the new industry development coordinator here at Manitoba Music, and today we're joined with three wonderful guests, Michael Duboff and Byron Pascoe from Edwards Creative Law, and our good friend Stephen Carroll, who is the music programs director at Manitoba Film and Music, MFM. So this is the first of a three-part series on music rights management, and it's going to be happening all month. We're going to stream it live here to Facebook and YouTube. And if you don't get a chance to see it live, feel free to go back and watch it again on YouTube. We'll make sure that that's available to you. These presentations are part of our MusicWorks initiative. The MusicWorks sessions are designed to help equip artists with the skills, tools, and information that they need to help them organize, establish, and grow their music as a business. So we're really excited about that. Today, part one of our music rights management series is about music agreements and the law. And we're going to have Mike and Byron walk us through that. And Stephen's going to pop in and give us some extra information, answer some questions on that. So if you want to know more about this whole series, you can feel free to check it out. We have the link up there, manitobamusic.com/workshops. That'll take you to MusicWorks, and you'll be able to hear all about that and read all about that. This is going to be going on the noon hour over the next 3 weeks. So we're going to do the first one now. 7 days from now, we're doing it again. And on Wednesday, we're going to do it, follow up the third time. So the first two, we're actually going to bring back Byron and Michael and Stephen. And for the third one, we're going to have in a special new guest. Okay, so we'll get to it. This first one is about music agreements and the law. And I'm going to get to some introductions. So if you guys would be so kind as to join me and introduce yourselves, we'd like to hear from you. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Alex.
How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having us today.
Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our fine viewers?
Sure thing. So myself and Byron are both entertainment lawyers at a firm called Edwards Creative Law, based out of Ottawa, but we kind of carry on work in a practice across the country. I actually live in Toronto, but I also do spend a lot of my time in Winnipeg, where I grew up, which is kind of how we kind of connected, and we've been working together for a little while now. So I know kind of the community well, and trying to just get back and reconnect with my roots in the music community there. And Byron has a bit more of a storied past with his practice. I think he can kind of speak to that briefly, maybe.
For sure. That's a great segue into our next introduction. Byron, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Alex and Mike. So my name is Byron Pascoe. I'm a entertainment lawyer with the firm Edwards Creative Law. I've been practicing entertainment law for about 9 years or so. I do mostly music, but not only music, working with writers, producers, managers, festivals, whatever other category I didn't just mention, helping them mostly to review and prepare agreements of a music variety. So yeah, happy to be here and looking forward to the chat today.
Definitely great to have you. And last but definitely not least, Stephen Carroll. Can you introduce yourself? How you doing?
Thanks, Alex. Hello, everybody out there on the internet land. Hi, Michael. Hi, Byron. Happy to be here. I'm the Director of Music Programs at Manitoba Film and Music, your local music industry funding agency based in the province, serving the Manitoba music industry with funding for recording, touring, video, marketing, some business development. And myself and my colleague Bonnie are always welcome people inquiring about our programs. But on the side of my desk, I also advise people on business matters such as royalties. I grew up in music, played music my whole life, and was a recording artist. And so I spent a lot of time managing my own collection, as well as managing a collection of rights for other artists when I was an artist manager. So I have a bit of experience, and it's a fascinating part of the music business and a really integral part of an artist's career and how they end up monetizing their works and earning a living. So I look forward to the discussion.
That's awesome. Monetizing your music and finding a way to make a living is pretty much what this is all about. These three fine gentlemen are going to be able to walk us through a lot of that and clear up a lot of the cobwebs that we might have and confusion about rights management. So I'm really happy. I'm going to leave that to you guys, and I'm going to hop off the screen. But before I do that, I just want to let anybody who's tuning in know that feel free to send us a message, send us a chat. Anything that you write gets popped up here in the stream, and I will make sure to relay those messages to our guests right now so they can answer your questions. So feel free to answer or to ask them as we go, and we'll be happy to answer them. With that, we're going to start off part one, music agreements and the law. That's part of our music rights management series. And I'm going to pop off screen. I'll let you guys get to it.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. So we have a PowerPoint that I think we can bring up to kind of help us on the visual side of some of the content we're talking about today. So I think Stephen did a bit of a good introduction to kind of some of the topics we're going to be touching upon today. The whole idea of, I'm getting a bit of echo, sorry. So we're going to be talking about everything to do with rights in terms of songwriting and music creation that will help to understand the facets of monetizing and getting your music out there in the world and how to do it in the proper avenues and the legal implications that comes with writing music. So today, you can see here our agenda. We're going to do just a brief introduction, and then we're going to be talking about some of the people and the parties that are involved in the possible music writing process and how that plays into rights management. We then have a couple scenarios for you that will help kind of make clear the different combinations of people involved. And then we're going to finish off with some tips and red flags and some specific kind of topics that often come up with hip hop music in that genre.
Yeah. So, rights management, what is it exactly? Well, the starting point perhaps is, who are the creative collaborators who are involved in a song? It's possible that you yourself are the only person involved. More commonly, people work with other people, for a variety of reasons. You want to have the best output possible, the best song possible, and usually that involves getting some creative input from a variety of types of people. That might be a producer, might be a co-writer, it might be a featured artist, and we'll get, as Mike said, we'll get into some other scenarios. But generally speaking, there is generally more than one person involved, but not always. And when we're talking about rights management, what we're really talking about is control and revenue. Really, who's entitled to make what decisions, who's entitled to what potential revenue or money that this song could make in future. And a lot of the focus of today's session is really about helping to give you some ideas to have conversations with your creative collaborators, and then to formalize your arrangements with them. It's important, we think, to figure out the rights and entitlements among the creative collaborators earlier on, because it can avoid conflict in future. And one of the tasks that music lawyers have is to help people with conflicts that could have been avoided if they had clarified everybody's rights and entitlements earlier on. So for example, if you're writing a song with somebody and someone else is giving some suggestions, 2 years later, the song comes out and nobody's credited, people might have they might be a little bit annoyed about that, and they might try to stop you from exploiting your song because they feel like they should have been, a part of the credit and the revenue that was generated. And, in that type of scenario, having clarity proactively among the people who were involved generally would have avoided that. It allows you to focus on the creatives. Once you figure out with your creative collaborators really kind of who's entitled to what, in terms of revenue and control, then you can focus on, the important stuff, which is, creating the magic of creating a new song. We wrote here, what are your expectations of me and my music? And I wrote a blog years ago, well, not that many years ago, but either way, a while ago, called 9 Words. These are kind of my favorite 9 words in music. What are your expectations of me and my music? And it's really a good starting point when you're collaborating with someone, or even if you have someone who's interested to manage you, or to produce with you, or write with you, or distribute your music, or help to publish your writing. It's a good way to kind of break the ice. It may, you can kind of say this in a variety of different ways, but really kind of, having a conversation with other people about what their expectations are about what you are creating together or what you've created on your own can be a really good way to start. That is the way to start it. That can be a way to start your conversation. And where it can lead to is having something, written down, whether by, the two of you, or by a lawyer, or by a manager, or by somebody else in your world, who can help you to clarify and formalize the different rights and entitlements among the people involved. And as I said, a good way of potentially starting that discussion is asking those 9 words of the people that you're working with. And for more information on that, there is a blog that Isabella will post in the chat, and also on our website at edwardslaw.ca. There's a link to a variety of blogs, including that one.
And I think before we continue, just as a brief disclaimer from Byron and myself, is just to let everyone know that anything we talk about today is just on the side of legal information, and it doesn't constitute legal advice that we're giving out to anyone. It's just information that is related to legal issues. It's a brief thing that we have to mention.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Mike, for jumping in with that.
Yeah. So as Byron kind of mentioned,
sorry to cut you off, Mike, but
Yeah.
Stephen, do you have anything to add about just like the general, rights management comments that we had to kind of kick off the discussion?
Yeah, just quickly, it's a life cycle with these with rights. They start at a certain place, and how they start is really important. How you launch them down their lifespan, and what trajectory they'll take, and how smoothly that trajectory is, really can get set out by some of the things that Michael and Byron are going to be discussing. And I think one of this next slide is a very good foundational one as to what are the underlying definitions for people participating in a recording.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, the creative process isn't it's not streamlined, and it's not a straightforward thing often. And over time, you'll have different individuals come in and out of the process who will become involved in the songwriting process. There's obviously the writers, there's the performers, the people that actually play the music for the recording. There's other musicians that may back you on a track or an album that aren't exactly part of the artist or the group. The group that is being the focus of. Producers can have a variety of different roles in the process. They may help write, they may even perform sometimes, or they might just guide the process itself. And featured artists, again, kind of like musicians, they're more on a temporary basis. They will kind of, again, it's kind of straightforward. They'll feature on a track often. So for hip hop, it may be a guest artist coming in doing a verse, something kind of like that. And similarly, there's beat makers who will actually be the ones to write the beat that is used in the track. And this beat maker could be an organization, or it could be an individual. It could be more of a formal process or informal. And so all these different individuals have different implications with the 3 royalty buckets, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And so again, the division between these people, it can really vary based on a lot of different circumstances. They can be negotiated, or they can be more straightforward. But these are just, in general, the kinds of collaborators that you often come across in the industry.
And each of those categories comes with its own tier of royalties as well, which we'll get into in more depth, I believe, as we go through this, but we'll probably cover a little bit as we go through this dialogue today. But each of them are a tier in a way, in a relationship, different relationship with the recording, and then a different relationship to the rights that surround that recording.
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, sorry, Byron, you go on.
Sure. Yeah. So, as Stephen and Mike were alluding to, or saying specifically, there are different types of creative collaborators, and what they're entitled to is kind of the classic legal response to anything, that it depends. It depends on what you agree with these people. And if you don't have any kind of agreement, then things are unclear. And when a song, if the song is successful financially, however you define that, it could become a problem if it wasn't figured out proactively. And we're not trying to scare anybody. We're just kind of talking about, some of the reasons why it is appropriate, or at least suggested, to think about these things proactively. But deals can be figured out after the fact. They don't have to be done at the time when a song is being made. That's preferable. It's a lot easier to share money that doesn't yet exist. But that doesn't mean that you can't have an agreement with people, days, weeks, months, years after the fact. And what we call kind of or what some people call anyway, like 3 royalty buckets, and you can use whatever analogy you want, but really a lot of the revenue potential from music in general falls into one of these 3 buckets. There are other sources of revenue for music for sure, but a decent starting point is to point out the fact that there are royalties that are available potentially to be earned from the actual composition itself, from the actual recording itself, what we call the master, or what is often called the master recording. And then thirdly, from the digital performance of the people who are vocalists or instrumentalists on that recording. So oftentimes I might say to somebody, kind of whoever will listen, to say, listen, like, okay, well, let's talk about who might be entitled to money from the composition, who might be entitled to money from the recording, and who might be entitled to revenue from the digital performance on that recording. And that'll become kind of a recurring theme here when we talk about different scenarios of people involved. If you take anything away from this, just think about writing, the master, and the digital performance. Hopefully you take away more than that, but that's a good one to take away. And let's jump to the next slide, which is all about co-writer agreements. So actually, sorry, before I do that, Stephen or Mike, do you have anything to add about the prior slide?
Yeah, those are the first 3 kind of big buckets that that a song kind of generates. Those 3, from this, it gets a little more, there's various kind of permutations of royalties, which we're going to get into. But right at the beginning, I think this is a great overview. This is the top level view, these 3 categories. And when you're thinking about your rights, keep those 3 in mind as we go through this, because as Byron was saying, these are the 3 giant governing categories. And then when you're thinking about managing royalties, you're really managing elements of these 3 different categories.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of the first bucket here, the writing composition one, as we get into the next slide, a commonly used agreement with respect to figuring out what the writers are each, how they're setting themselves up, is through a split sheet. A split sheet really just kind of outlines, well, a split sheet can be written in one of 100 different ways, and there's no legal way that a split sheet needs to be. And there's a variety of different split sheets that you might find online, or that we could send to you after. But at the end of the day, kind of the recurring element that should be in every split sheet is who collectively is entitled to a piece of the composition, what their share is, what their allocation is, how they are splitting the composition. And how do you determine splits? So there's a variety of ways. Again, there's no way that it has to be done, but a common way that kind of starts the conversation is that the person or people who collectively wrote the underlying music or the beat or the melody share half of the composition, and the person or people, or maybe robot that created the lyrics, share the other half. That doesn't have to be how it's done, but it is one way in how it's done. Another way of how it's done is that everybody involved whether you wrote one word or every word, or a bit of a melody or the whole thing, is that everybody involved equally gets a share. And one way that describes that is the so-called Nashville split, where everybody involved takes an equal share. But those two methods are two of the many methods of dealing with it, and really it's a matter of figuring out what everybody is agreeable to and have everybody agreeing to it. And so maybe even before the others jump in, let's just jump to the next slide, which has this is a split sheet that we prepared in past that happy to send to anybody who asks. This is one way of putting together a split sheet. At the top, you have the composition title, which is so a working title means a title currently, and if the title changes, that doesn't change the splits. It just, this is what it's being called now. You might also have other names that a song might go by, but at the start in this example is what is the name of the song that we're actually talking about. Some split sheets include credits of who gets a performance credit, who gets a written by credit, and or a produced by credit. You might have a featuring credit. You might have other stuff too, but here are kind of three of the more common credits. Generally, a split sheet doesn't list who owns the recording. I think it should. If there is a recording, oftentimes you're writing a song and there is no recording of it yet, but sometimes it's relevant to include who owns the recording, if there is one, and who controls the composition. So if you have, let's say there's two writers, let's say Stephen and Mike are the writers, and they each get 50% of the composition. If they confirm that Stephen controls the composition, then Stephen controls the composition, even though Mike and Stephen are sharing the royalties that are generated from it. So one way to integrate a kind of a control piece of a split sheet is just to say who controls the composition. And if you don't have that, typically, and it depends, but typically everybody collectively shares control of the composition, whether you wrote 1% or 99%. And let's just go to the next slide before we bring everybody else in. The next slide is one way to present the different people who are the writers. PRO is it's not pro, but rather performance rights organization. And so if you're in Canada, hopefully it's SOCAN. If you're working with a writer in the United States, it might be ASCAP or BMI or CSAC, etc. So, and then IPI is a number. Everybody, no matter what performance rights organization you're with in the world, has a IPI number. And the key thing really is what is the share. And so back to the Mike and Stephen example, if Mike and Stephen were 50-50 on this composition and there are no publishers involved, then it would say 50% for Mike and 50% for Stephen. As you might have as some people might have a publisher involved, that's where they get added to this as well. But at its core, most split sheets have the list of the writers and what their shares are and what the names of the song is, or what the name of the song is. That's kind of a starting point. This is a bit more elaborate or detailed split sheet. And a related question is whether it's enough. And again, it depends. If two people are just writing a song together, that's one thing. If two people are writing a song together, one of them is performing it and has some entitlements to the other writer from a variety of sources, then this might not be enough. But it's definitely a good starting point. Stephen, what do you want to add about split sheets?
Yeah, I think we should pause just for a sec and make sure everybody's oriented. So maybe we should just talk about when we use a split sheet and what exactly it is, right? I don't know if Michael and you want to just sort of just really about like bird's eye view. And we've also introduced SOCAN here, so we should probably just give some people some background for those who maybe not know that, and maybe what a publisher is, just so they understand, because there might be some confusion looking at this document if you didn't understand what a writer was or what a publisher was and what exactly SOCAN's role is. So do you guys want to take that? Maybe I'll just throw that back to you.
Sure. So I think that, so let's, as I was mentioning that, like, let's say Stephen and Mike are writing a song together. They might decide once they finish writing the song that they want to formalize their arrangement with each other, or just kind of document the fact that they both believe that they are each entitled to half of the composition, in the sense that if there is money generated for the composition, that they would equally share that money that's being generated. A split sheet might be done. So it could be prepared before people start working together, while they're working together, right after they're working together, or at some point in the future. There's no rule about when it has to be done, and there's no rule that it has to be done at all. But it is a way for people who are creating a composition together to outline and clarify what they're each entitled to. And by the way, ideally, they both also sign this document or this sheet, or they email it to each other and confirm that they both agree to it. A split sheet doesn't have to be limited to 2 people. There could be 17 people working on a song together, and they're each entitled to a certain share. Forgetting about the publisher line here, every composition should add up to 100%, meaning that, if Mike has 60% and Stephen has 80%, and that adds up to 140%, and the dog agrees. And so, or maybe the dog is saying, "Hey, I was involved. I want to share too." So, now we have to put the dog in here, and maybe the dog is getting 0%. But we want to confirm that your dog, is not getting anything. So someone is allowed to be included in a split sheet, even if they're not getting anything. And in fact, it's a good way to clarify with somebody that their entitlements are nothing. It's a way to protect against that person later, coming around to say, well, hey, I was involved in that song, or I was in the studio with you. I made some contributions, and therefore I'm entitled to something. I did reference SOCAN. So SOCAN is a collection. There's a variety of ways of kind of saying what they are, but at the end of the day, there's 175,000 plus members of SOCAN in Canada who are most of them are writers, some of them are publishers. And SOCAN's role, among other things, is to help to ensure that writers of music and publishers, which I'll get into, but let's say writers of music, are properly compensated for their works. And so when music is played on radio or on TV or live at, for example, a concert, and a variety of other types of uses, both here in Canada and around the world, SOCAN's job is to ensure that relevant people or companies are paying SOCAN a fee for that composition to be publicly performed. SOCAN brings in money. I think it paid out $438 million last year, give or take. And they have a variety of sources of money coming in, and they have a variety of people and companies that they send money out to. But their role is to ensure that that people who publicly perform music in Canada are paying SOCAN fees, which in turn get paid to the writers and publishers of that music, whether they're Canadian or not. They bring in money, they pay out money. It's really an important thing, I think, for everybody who writes music in Canada, to be, whether you writing one song or hundreds, to be a member of SOCAN and to check out SOCAN.com and learn about it. It's a free membership. It's very easy to do. I'm a member of SOCAN. I'm not a songwriter, but I'm a member. Although I did register a song that I wrote with my son many years ago. I won't bore you with the details of that, but that's Stephen. What would you like to add about SOCAN and the role and time that a split sheet might come up?
Right. So this document occurs really early on in the kind of process, the life of a song, and it does set you guys on a path, if you use this correctly, to delineate your relationship with that music, your share of the ownership of the writer's portion. So we're still in that writer's column, so everybody keeps themselves organized as we've looked at the 3 buckets. And we should maybe just quickly mention it. If we're going to go into more detail about SOCAN next week, so we'll circle back to that. And we'll circle back in more detail about publishers too. But publishers would control are entities that are set up to help you administer, or they're professional companies that are set up to administer catalog for writers. Until the moment you sign with a publisher, like these companies, you are in control of that publisher's share. So in the writer's share, there's two sides to it, which we'll go into a little more detail next week. But for intents purposes, if you're looking at this and you're not signed to a publisher, I would assume, I hope I'm correct in saying this, that you'd put your own name under the publisher's column. Is that right, Michael or Byron?
Yeah, or you could just put nothing in here. I mean, it really depends on the circumstances. And as Stephen said, the session next week is more about some of the nuts and bolts of registration and what those organizations do. The starting point is, what's the name of this composition? Who's involved? What is their share of the composition? That's really the starting point. And you may or may not get into the whole publishing thing in this context. However, you might, and you might, in the sense that if, for example, Stephen had a publishing company and Mike and Stephen agreed that Stephen's publishing company controls this composition, they might include that in the split sheet. But really the starting point and the major takeaway is that it's a good idea with your creative collaborators when you're creating a composition to clarify what everybody's share is of the composition. That gets you 90% or more of the way through this split sheet, and really that is the big takeaway. There are other bells and whistles that can be added when appropriate, but the starting point is, who are the writers, what is everybody's share? Let's all agree to that, and that's really the start.
And for hip hop and, like people working in electronic music, maybe not necessarily guitar based or keyboard analog music, where maybe an analog music like keyboard based or guitar, etc. It's more obvious generally what a co-write kind of is. It's two people generally in a room with their instruments, or some form of that, maybe over the internet. But what about instances where a split sheet should be used? Let's say in hip hop and electronic music, maybe there's somebody's working with a beat maker, or etc. Is that should the beat makers or hip hop producers or etc. be on these sheets as well?
For sure. And like the starting point is that let's say you have a rapper and a beat maker, and the beat maker makes a beat and the rapper writes the lyrics that he or she's performing, then generally speaking, the split sheet would say that the writer is getting 50% and the beat maker is getting 50%. The context, though, is that you probably wouldn't use a split sheet with respect to a beat maker. You'd probably have, we're going to get to a bit later in the presentation, about a beat maker agreement. And in that agreement, it would detail what the split is of the composition. So you don't need a split sheet if you have a different agreement that's outlining and governing and formalizing your relationship with somebody else. So you don't need to overlap generally to have a split sheet and a producer agreement, or a split sheet and a beat maker agreement, if you are only working with that other person that you have a producer agreement with, or a beat purchase agreement with.
We have oh, sorry.
No, you take it, Michael.
I was just going to say, we have one question that came in on this topic before we move on. And Andrina has asked whether arrangements factor into splits on original compositions, or does it only encompass melody and chord structure? There on the screen.
There you go. Yeah, well, the first thing that came to mind when we're talking about arrangements is that if you're arranging a public domain piece or adapting it, there's 7 or 9 different scenarios that SOCAN puts out, whereby it outlines how you deal with registering a piece in which you are arranging, meaning changing the music or adapting the lyrics to a public domain piece. It's a whole other session. But yeah, if you are contributing in any way to the composition, unless you were paid for your work and you're agreeing to take none of the composition, then arguably you should be a part of the composition. So that's a quick answer for that. But if Stephen, or Mike, if you have anything to add.
I think we'll be alluding to that slightly too when we get to the scenarios in a moment,
Sure.
where we kind of have different situations similar to this, where there's some variation of the music that's not necessarily an original composition, and how that kind of plays into the division to the entitlements.
Let's jump to the scenarios, Mike, because I think that they are. I think the scenarios do a nice little job at outlining, the progression, no pun intended, of how more people get involved and how you might split things up. So.
Yeah, so our first scenario here, it's the most basic thing that you can find. And so we have Jimmy, who's our subject artist for the day. And as you can see, he does it all. And so in this case, the song is not perfect, but Jimmy has written it, he has performed it, and he's recorded it himself. And so again, you can see the 3 royalty buckets that we kind of brought up earlier in the talk. And you can see that when there's only one person who's done it all, he will get 100% of the entitlements to the royalties.
This is the most simple scenario you could have. And this is one thing people kind of aren't aware of. When you do it all like that, you actually control all those rights yourself. And until you designate those rights to somebody else, like a publisher, or if you sign a record deal, or you generally are in control of those rights. As long as it is 100% original composition, you would be entitled to all of those royalties under the writing column and under the master royalties column, as well as because you performed it yourself. You were the artist, a sole artist on the recording. You are entitled to 100% of the performance share for neighboring rights.
Yeah, and in this case too, Jimmy is also the producer, so he's recorded it. There's no one who helped him out with that process as well. So there's no division with the master royalties.
So the self-releasing, self-recording, self-composing artist has quite a lot of registrations to take care of and quite a lot of administration on their plate.
Who knows? Might be a big hit. So the second scenario, Jimmy's lyrics were a bit brutal. They need a little bit of refinement. As a little heads up too, you can thank our maestro Byron for writing these colorful scenarios. I think he had some fun with them. Anyways, Jimmy found Danielle, who wrote entirely new lyrics for the composition. So now we have another person involved in the process. As you can see, there's now 2 co-writers. Jimmy wrote the melody, but he is still the performer and the producer. And Danielle is the co-writer who helped refine the lyrics. So again, it's not that complicated of a change here. The writing royalties are now 50-50 split. And as Byron mentioned earlier, these splits are not set in stone. So they are something to be agreed upon and may be variable, as you'll see shortly. But they can also be kind of straightforward and common sense, where in this case, there's 2 writers, so they've agreed to split the writing royalties 50-50. Anyone have anything to add on that one?
Nope.
And again, Danielle didn't have any involvement with the actual recording or the performance, and that's why her entitlements are only with regards to the writing. So you can see that Jimmy still has 100% of the other 2 buckets.
Should we explain a little bit how the producer's relationship can be such that they would be entitled to royalties?
That's actually in the next scenario, I think.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Good segue.
So scenario 3, Jimmy has found a producer, Ted, who created a much better recording of the song, changed around the melody a bit, and introduced a new idea for the bridge. So the titles are kind of not entirely all-encompassing for their roles. So you can see that Ted is listed as producer, but as mentioned, he did have a part in some of the other facets of the recording. So you can see that Danielle is still only a writer, so her entitlement percentage stays static at 50%. But now Jimmy's kind of buckets have diluted slightly because Ted, as producer, has kind of had a role in a lot of the different parts of the recording process. So he's now has a share of the writing, master, and the digital performance royalties. And this can be common for producer, where there's a lot of like hands-on producers who will kind of have some help along all the steps of the process, and so it's not uncommon for them to kind of dip into all three buckets potentially.
Yep. It is not universally applied, though. It depends on your agreement with your producer. So that's something to keep in mind. This is just an example of a scenario where the producer has said that you set an agreement with them that they're going to be entitled to a percentage of the master royalties. Sometimes you could be paying them an upfront fee. That would be a flat fee for their services, and there's no what's called back end. Or sometimes you'll hear the word points, essentially, which is a summary of percentage points, which would represent a portion of the master royalties.
Yeah. So again, it's all this is contingent on the agreement between these parties and the collaborators. So all these numbers can change, and again, you kind of have to refer back to what the original agreement was, especially with the producer, because there's often producer agreements that are relevant to these scenarios.
And so what sort of happened here is the song has migrated from being just Jimmy's composition, where he controlled everything. The song developed. He took in new partners, and those partners changed it. Were entitled then to some rights, and then he negotiated with his producer, Ted, to come in and improve the work as far as the recording goes, as well as Ted worked on the composition, and therefore Ted was entitled to 15. Well, they made agreement that Ted was going to receive 15% of the master royalties. And Ted also, it seems, performed. Ted was a very versatile producer. Ted performed. And so in that sense, Ted was entitled also to a share of the performance royalties. And what's interesting about this is sort of, Matt, you can see Jimmy's relationship actually with the song has remained the same. He's always, his role, he hasn't sold 100% of any of his rights. He's maintained control of his writing. He's maintained the master royalties. And because he was a performer, it's inherent that he would always retain those rights. Did I summarize that correctly there, guys?
Yeah. At the end of the day, this is one scenario. This is one example of this scenario. And there's 101 different ways that Jimmy, Danielle, and Ted could have arranged their these different royalties. And what we don't have on this chart is the fact that Jimmy may have also paid Ted something. So, there's other elements of the arrangements between these parties. But for the purposes of this scenario, this is what they've decided. And it doesn't have to be this way, but this is what they've done as an example of what could be done.
Yeah. And I think that kind of answers one of the questions that's popped up from Matt. If we want to put that on the screen briefly. So again, the short answer is that this is just the scenario that this shows, where again it could have been divided in different ways. In this case, I would imagine that the fact is that Jimmy and Danielle wrote the lyrics, whereas here it shows that Ted kind of rearranged the writing of the melody a bit, and so that diluted Jimmy's as opposed to Danielle's share of the writing royalties. But again, this is something that is agreed upon among the parties, and you'll see actually again shortly that this will change further.
Let's jump to scenario 4. What comes next?
Just we'll answer Derek's question quickly.
Sure.
Derek, mixing engineers, it is possible for them to also receive points, aka a percentage of the royalties, depending on the agreement. Generally, they would be party to master royalties, unless they're actually contributing to the composition, like writing, or they are performing. But generally, mixed engineers receive some points. But it's not universally applied. Again, it's all about your agreement with that artist as a mixed engineer, or the artist agreement with their mixed engineer. And sorry, Byron, back to you.
Agreed. Let's do scenario 4. See what happens next.
Scenario 4: Jimmy meets Eden. It's a long story, but it's now a duo. Maybe they will create a band one day. And Eden has changed some of the lyrics around as well. So here, now you can see, so referring back to the question we just had, now Danielle's share of the writing royalties entitlements has also decreased as well. Because it's a duo, Now Jimmy and Eden, their shares are more or less split evenly, other than the writing. And so you can see how it's a trickle down effect of the new person coming in and where they kind of fit into the three buckets. Here again, Eden is written. She's changed some of the lyrics, so she's got it. She's in the writing category. She's performed. She's part of the duo, so she's the digital performance royalties, and she was on the recording itself. And so there's that entitlement as well.
Same general comment. This is what the four of them agreed to. So Danielle agreed to take a lower percentage, and the only person who didn't make any changes in this round was Ted. So, Ted isn't needed to give consent because his entitlements didn't change at all. But Jimmy, Danielle, and Eden need to figure out, what they're all doing with the fact that Eden came into it. She contributed to the writing, and she's now her and Jimmy are performing together, and it's now a duo. And this band is two, and this is what they agreed to. And there's one more scenario of another element that may be added or is added to our case study today.
So scenario 5. Sorry, Stephen, did you have anything to add there?
No, we'll continue on.
All right. So the song sounded great, but it, as many songs do these days, it needed a rap verse. Bring in Damon, who wrote and recorded a verse. And so in this case, he would kind of meet the threshold for a featured artist on this track. And once again, you can see, similar to Eden, he's written a portion of the song, he's performed on it, and he was on the recording. And so he kind of plays into all three categories. Once again, referring back to the other question, Danielle's shares has once again decreased. And again, the producer, Ted, his share is stable at 15%, as for the other scenarios as well.
In this case, we've had 5 different scenarios. There's also 5 different songs. And it's likely in this, or I'm going to tell you that what happened was that this is obviously not true, but scenario 5 is the only song that, let's say, actually went public and was exploited. And so, if the song in version 1, 2, or 3, or 4 went public, then those would be the splits on those versions. But what these 5 people decided is that this final version with all these 5 people is the song that's exploited. And oftentimes, before you bring in other people, you write a song by yourself. And so it's not unusual for a song's evolution to add more people along the way and add and amend the entitlements of each person. And the key thing is just to ensure that everybody who's involved agrees to the new scenario, unless they've already agreed to what they're getting in the new version. So that's my comment on that.
So in this final version, we're seeing that the writing royalties are split quite extensively through all the writers. And so each one of those writers would be entitled to a share of the publishing revenue. And then under the publishing revenue, which we discussed about with SOCAN, also known as the royalties related to the composition. So all those people would be entitled to a portion of that. Then under the master column, which represents the rights that Jake generated from the recording, all those persons with a percentage would be entitled to a portion of the master revenue. And wherever that song earns money from the recording side of things, they would be entitled to a portion. And also in cases for the neighboring rights, so the featured artist share, you'd have these artists here all represented as getting a share of the featured artist. In each one of these would have to go off and register themselves to make sure that they're getting their money. And these splits that are laid out here would dictate how you would register the song. It's on the writing side, and on the performance side. On the master royalty side, it's slightly different.
For the master royalties, we presented it in a simple way, in that it's 35% of the money generated. Oftentimes, there will be a bit more of a formula that takes into account expenses that someone might incur, and or if there's a third-party record label involved. So it can be as simple as a percentage of money generated, at the source, like money. Like, for example, if you use, let's say, DistroKid or CD Baby or TuneCore, who distributes your music, you might say that, Jimmy's getting 35% of that money and Ted's getting 15, etc. And you're all set up on your on the team site that DistroKid has if you're using them. Or it can be more complicated isn't the right word, but there might be other elements in it that help to establish what the 35% is of, because it might not be all of the money generated from the recording. But that's kind of another session. But this is really the starting point of these different scenarios and the different buckets. And I think kind of in light of the time, maybe we can move on to the next slide. But we're happy to answer, make sure that all your questions are answered, even if it's after the session today, even after the live session. So these are some music agreement tips. And for a bit more details on this, there's a blog that Isabella will share that you can find on our website. Some of the most important ones here is the first one, and kind of relates to the last one too. Just because you're given an agreement, whether it's to distribute your music or be your publisher or your manager, it's nice to be wanted. That doesn't mean that it's the right fit for you at this time with your project. So you don't, just because you get an agreement offered to you doesn't mean you actually have to take it. But it might be something you want to do. The final comment here is who else is signing this contract? And one of the kind of the key things I like to tell people or suggest is that the most important thing in any music agreement is typically who you're doing this deal with. Like if it's a manager, is the manager the right fit for you? And, what the commission is that you're paying your manager. Yeah, that's important too, but it's more important that you're working with the right people. And I think I'm able to just go to the next slide. And, as I said, this information is more is outlined in other places. The kind of a red flag or something that is always relevant when reviewing music agreements is to make sure that there aren't any inconsistencies between what you're told and what's in the agreement. And I apologize that it may look a little weird in the bullet points here, but the key thing is that when reviewing a music agreement, one of the key roles that a music lawyer has is to make sure that the agreement actually says what you think it should say. And another red flag of music agreements, like things to watch out for, is that you're giving up more rights than you actually need to give. And kind of the classic example is that if you're an artist who's getting an offer from a record label to distribute your music, if they kind of throw in there that they're also your publisher now or your manager now, that's not, they don't need those rights in order to distribute your music. So just the key takeaway from this slide is ensuring that if you have an agreement that's you're being asked to sign, that it's actually consistent with what you think it should be providing. And secondly, that you're not giving, more than you need to be giving. Stephen, do you have any comments on that? Or Mike? I know I'm kind of rushing through it, and I apologize if I'm talking a little fast on it. But again, the blogs that we have to share on these topics, go into it in further detail. But if Stephen or Mike, if you have anything to add, please jump in.
Yeah, I guess
I would just add that. Sorry, Stephen, you go.
Oh, Michael.
Okay.
All right. So the rights that we're discussing are the kind of stem from those three buckets: the writers, the master royalties, and then the featured digital art, the digital performance royalties. And they get governed by agreements generally, and in much as they'll be sort of the next phase of you developing the kind of path of this song. You're going to put it out to the community. You're going to sell it. Maybe there's a third party that's getting involved, and that's where the agreements come into play. And there's great lawyers like we have on this panel that can help you navigate some of the nuances of those agreements.
Yeah, and I was just going to say just generally that like a lot of these agreements will kind of form the backbone of your relationships with kind of these partners, these collaborators, and these people that you're going to be working with. So it's not something to rush into. And as Byron was kind of alluding to or was saying it's all right to wait, and it's all right to kind of make sure you understand what do you want out of these relationships, to make sure that they're always reflected in the agreements that you're signing.
Great.
Hey, Alex.
Hey guys. Is
it okay if we run over?
Yeah, I think we're okay to go a little bit over. So if there are any questions, guys, definitely add them in the chat and we'll make sure we get to it. I saw that Matt had asked a question a little earlier, session players being entitled to master royalties. Somebody wants to jump on that question.
They get them if they negotiated to get them.
There you go. So Matt, if you
Everything,
are
the related point is that everything's negotiable. These are some of kind of like the tools in the toolbox of what people can get. But at the end of the day, a lot of people who perform on songs are paid a fee. Stephen referred to the word of a buyout. Oftentimes people are paid a fee as a buyout to have no further entitlements, no matter what happens with the song. There's nothing immoral about that or wrong if that's what the parties decided. And hey, you know what? If you're a session player and you need, some some money for rent tomorrow, you might need some cash to pay rent, and you're kind of maybe you have the opportunity to take a bit less money but get some potential money if the song does well, but you just need the cash today. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with offering someone a buyout or accepting one if it makes sense. But the alternative to getting a fee and not having any future potential entitlements is that you do have some kind of share of the future entitlements of the song. And the three buckets we're talking about are three of the potential ways that you, whether you're a side musician or a background vocalist or a producer or a featured artist, these are some ways that you might be able to earn money from the song, from the revenue the song makes in future. So definitely possible to earn money no matter what role you play, or not. Depends on what you've agreed to with the other people that are involved.
There is a category of digital performance royalties and terrestrial radio royalties called non-featured, which just goes to those artists who are background musicians and session musicians. And that you can register. We'll be going through that on the next panel on that category split. So there is a way. Generally, those aren't reassigned. As far as I understand, you're always entitled to those as a session musician. And I'll go into that next week. So tune in next week for detail on that. We should go to the next slide, I think.
Cliffhanger. Yeah. So is the beat makers either way?
That's
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Clearing samples. So samples are the concept of using a sample is that it's an existing recording that you're using, a second of or more than a second of, and you're using it in some way for this new work that you've created. So an existing song, you take a few seconds of it, you turn it upside down, but you stretch it out, but you're using it in your new work. And the jargon involved here is that you're clearing a sample, means you're getting permission to use a sample. So what do you need in order to actually have the right to use a sample or the right to sample something that exists? Two separate types of requirements here. One is the right to use the original recording, and one is the right to use the original composition. And so where do you go to get permission? So with respect to the recording, if it's an artist who's not signed up with a record label, then generally you try to find the artist and ask them directly. If someone has a record label, a label for that song, it's a good starting point to contact the label and ask them if they give if they are the right party to contact to get these rights. With respect to the composition, you can go on SOCAN's website, for example, and look up to see who the writers and publishers are of the composition. And that is a starting point to figure out who controls the composition. Oftentimes in reality, it's very hard to get an answer out of people if they will give you the right to use a sample. Sometimes they just will be non-responsive or ask you to pay a lot more money than you ever thought would be appropriate. We're not the sample police, and we're also not suggesting that you use samples without permission. But we're also, having a reality check that it is hard to get samples clear. There are companies out there whose job it is to clear samples. So there's a whole industry of people who do that. you can try yourself. The related question is, well, do I need to get permission? If they might think that I'm honoring them by using their work in my song, or they'll never catch me. Those are some of what people might say about a sample. It doesn't make it legal. Just because someone won't catch you doesn't make it, legal that you can do it. But, the reality is that some people feel like, well, they'll never catch me, or it's buried, or I did too much to it and they'll never catch me. So, my comment on that is that, if you want to take the risk, I'm not going to say you should, but that's maybe what you end up doing. But the risk in taking that risk is that you'll eventually be caught, and you may end up giving up a lot more money than what you ever did if you asked for permission. So asking for permission versus asking for forgiveness. Permission is when you ask, before you actually use a sample. Forgiveness is asking for permission after you've been caught. Those are two entirely different kinds of conversations that you might have. But, the takeaway here is that if you want to sample something, you don't have the right to do it just because you feel like they would be honored by your use of their music, but rather you do have to get permission to use the recording. You do have to get permission to use the composition that you're using. And, part of what a lawyer does, and also like sample companies, are that they help you to get permission. And, we could talk more at length about it, but, that's really kind of the key takeaway here, that there are two different types of permission. There isn't, there's a variety of ways to reach the decision makers. And if you can't get the rights, don't use it. But again, we're not the police here, but we're suggesting that here are the ways to get a sample cleared. Stephen.
Go to Alex.
Yeah, actually, I did have a question. I have seen different companies that are offering services of like replaying or kind of like if you had something that you wanted to sample and you're not able to clear it, they'll interpolate it in different way. Is that a reasonable option, or is that not? Can you still get in trouble in that?
Well, I keep saying it depends. So, at some point, some interpolations, meaning like, well, if someone says, I want you to make a sound like this, mm-hmm. Someone might feel like that's actually, you're just kind of, covering, you're doing kind of a cover version of it, and you're actually still using the composition. Clearly, if you re-record something, you don't have to get permission to use the recording. But depending on what you do, you may still need the right to use the composition. And there's no kind of clean line between essentially what is copyright infringement and what's not. Like there isn't a law that says, well, if this is the line. So it's not the clearest of distinctions between, what is copying the composition and what is not. But, when we're talking about, practical ways to deal with stuff, you are, one thing that some people do is what you said, is to try to get somebody to make something that sounds similar, but not the same. And the further you're away from the actual recording, the better. I'll leave it at that.
Cool. Great answer.
It's not a complete answer, because there really isn't a complete answer, but and again, that's not legal advice. But
no, for sure. But like this slide in general, the murkiness of clearing samples already, and they won't catch me, and it's a buried beat, and this much, and what do I? So like that was just, for me, I felt like that was just a logical progression to make sure that we got that in there. I just wanted to say, as we're going on, if there is anybody that does have any questions that they want to pop into the live chat, we'll try to make sure that we can get those going. And these guys are willing to stay for a little bit longer. So if you do have some questions, you can get them in under the wire, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, we have next week too.
Yeah, exactly. Stephen, do you have anything to add about samples before we go to the beat making stuff?
Yeah, I think it's a creative exercise to use the samples, but you have to tread carefully about trying to put it out online. And if you want to have a career using singularly samples as your uncleared samples as the way you're kind of creating your work, it's going to cause some problems for you down the line. So you want to be prepared, tread carefully, and ideally get them cleared. And there are agencies out there that can assist you in clearing them. Lawyers can work for you. There's companies that specialize in this, or you can work on composing your own work, or work with musicians to create original work that you would control entirely, which is kind of the ideal business model. That way you're cutting in your creative collaborators, as we've said before, in a really clear way right off the hop, and you have those agreements because you've set that all up. Whereas the clearances for samples can be very tricky depending on which ones you get, because some people do not actually clear samples, they just sue.
Exactly. They hope a song does well, and then they go after it, right? I mean, if there's one song that's sampled 100 times and, only 2 of those songs actually, did well financially, however you want to define that, they're just going to spend their energy on the 2 people after the song has made a lot of money.
And the sampling comes up in the next slide here about beat leasing, I believe, because you don't know what's in some of those beats.
So, I mean, that's a whole thing too, for sure. If you're getting a beat from somebody else, one of the many questions is, does this beat that I'm getting, is it actually original, or does it include samples? And so, one of the initial questions to ask a beat maker that you're working with is, are there any samples in what you are creating for me or giving to me? Because if there are, then you got to deal with, who's clearing the sample. And it's a lot better. We're kind of dealing with one of the challenges of beat maker agreements if there's no actual samples in it. I mean, also the beat makers might say, yeah, there's no samples in this, but they might be lying to you. Or like they thought there weren't, but the beat maker worked with somebody else and they put a sample in something. So a good thing to clarify with your beat maker, if let's say you're the artist, let's say a rapper, you work with a beat maker, you want to clarify if there are any samples. And secondly, if there end up being any samples, who's responsible for that sample? But people can get beats from a variety of different sources, whether from somebody you've worked with for a long time, or you met at a music conference, or whatever else, or somebody you found online who uses one of the websites that sell beats. And this, the purpose of this presentation is not to promote any of those companies specifically, or say whether any of them are good or bad or whatever else. Here are just some, considerations with respect to a beat maker agreement. And the beat maker agreement might be the terms and conditions on the website in which you're buying a beat. And in a variety of situations that come to mind, with clients who bought a beat online through a website, they thought that they got a lot more rights than they actually got. Because they just assumed that because they paid a fee that they own everything and control everything. And that is usually not the case. So, again, if you're going to remember anything from today, it's if you're buying beats off a website, read the terms and conditions. If anything at all scares you in what you're reading, or you don't understand it, ask the beat maker if they're willing to do a deal outside of the scope of that website. To get the rights that you want and need. I mean, like with any agreement, you want to make sure you understand it. And if you don't understand it, then ask. And if something looks weird, then ask about it. A concept in beat making agreements is the concept of leasing a beat versus buying a beat. Leasing a beat, generally speaking, means that you, among other people, are getting the rights to use this beat. It usually has a lot of limitations on what your rights are. It could be like, it's generally not something that I would recommend anybody to do if they are, getting the beat. If you're getting a beat from somebody, you want to be the only one to use it. You want to make sure that no one else can use it, because you don't want anyone else to have the same underlying music as you do, unless you're okay with that. If you're buying a beat just to kind of play around with it, that's one thing. But if you're releasing it, as on your next music project, it could be problematic if you are just leasing it versus buying it, or having it non-exclusively instead of exclusively. So I know I'm kind of talking about a lot of things at once here, but the best case scenario for you as an artist, if you're an artist, is that you are buying the exclusive rights to use a beat. You own it, you control it, no one else can use it. Where things get a little bit not so good is if you and other people can buy it, and if the beat maker has the ability to take their rights back or to limit the amount of streams that you can have on your beat. So the beat maker agreement that is on a website or that you get prepared for someone to sign would outline all of the elements about control and who's entitled to what the credits are. It's really about how you deal with all those buckets of royalties that we talked about with respect to your beat maker. Two of the most frustrating clauses in a beat maker agreement, if I'm representing the artist, is that the artist has limited rights to use it. For example, they can only have a certain number of streams of the song before they no longer have rights anymore. And my least favorite of all, the concept of a buyback, whereby a beat maker can buy the rights back for like double the price that they were paid. So if you paid a beat maker $100 and the beat maker has the right to buy the beat back for $200, what that means is that if your song does well, and allows you to go for a run on that lovely background there, then the beat maker is just going to say, well, I want the $200 back, or make me a better offer. So if you're planning for success, which I assume you are in everything that you do, you want to make sure that if you're using a beat that someone else made, that you have the ability to do whatever you want with it, and not be limited by a variety of things. So, this even just scratches the surface of the challenges and opportunities in a beat maker agreement. But again, the big takeaway is read the terms and conditions that govern your use of the beat, and then everything else, is related to that. But make sure you understand, what you're signing up for. I've nothing against people buying beats from other people, so long as everybody is clear about your entitlements, and that's reasonable in the circumstances.
And when you buy a beat, what we're seeing here is you're interacting with those three buckets. But actually, that beat maker will be probably entitled, depending on the agreement. Generally, let's say you buy one for purchase. You're doing this the right way. You're going to purchase it. You're going to purchase non-exclusive. They're going to be entitled to that. Beat maker will be part of the composition. Likely, there'll be underlying music, foundational music there, and they'll be entitled to a bit of the composition bucket, so the writer's share. They'll be also entitled, depending on your agreement, to possibly a portion of the master royalties. And they're also a performer, so they could be entitled to the digital performance royalties. Conversely, looking at it from a beat maker perspective, when you make these agreements, you want to be mindful that you are technically entitled to these things. And when you're making a beat, you're actually making quite a lot of the composition. So those three categories still apply to you. Those are elements that you control initially, and then you're actually selling them to the artist. So both parties need to be aware and mindful of those as you're going forwards. And I think a lot of artists are remiss in on both sides, the beat maker and the artist, in understanding their relationship with those three categories, and the fact that when they do this, they're triggering all this stuff.
Nice, very good to actually for you to say all that, and I'm hoping that people are able to follow a lot of that, because we've been seeing a lot of, obviously, the leasing beats and non-exclusive deals are getting really big. So that's something that I was really excited for people to look at. And to kind of hopping on with what Byron was saying, the buybacks, there's big, the buybacks, just from things that I've seen and I've heard, can be pretty crazy. You'll see a beat maker literally lease out a beat potentially like 50, 100 times to a bunch of people, and you track down the one that's going to really work, or the one that's going to make sense, and you can kind of lock off everybody else, and you're going to make a bunch of money from this one situation. So it's kind of a nice way to throw a bunch of lines in the water potentially, and see when you get a fish if you are a beat maker. But if you are an artist, it can be very dangerous. So I'm really happy that we're able to touch in on a lot of these things. We are starting to get a little bit deeper, but we are going to be coming back. Is there anything that you guys wanted to finish up with before we kind of start wrapping this one?
No, I think that actually wraps up our presentation for the day. So timing worked out well.
Ish.
So yeah, again, thanks for having us today, Alex and Stephen as well. I know we're doing this again next week, but it was a great chat, and we're always happy to kind of delve into these kinds of topics.
So we'll take some of these foundational ideas we got on the table next week, and we're going to start putting them some applications for registering and taking taking this monetization of your work to the next phase. And we'll try and link back to some of the topics here. And we're happy to answer some questions that have come up over this week, and we can answer them next week if you want to discuss them then. If there's any points of discussion, we're happy to dig in. So please do shoot us a message. Most people have my email, but I'll maybe Isabella can drop it in the chat for everybody.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, Manitoba Music, for putting this together and this whole series, and Isabella for helping us out with the tech side.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that. Great to see some of the chats, people who are participating. Like Steven said, everybody's going to be back again next week, same time, same Manitoba Music time, same Manitoba Music channel. We're going to be here at noon the following Wednesday, and we're going to come back again. So this is the part one of a three-part series. So the first part, obviously today, was rights management, music agreements, and the law. And the next one is going to be rights management. It's part two, organizations and registration. And Steven's going to walk us through that, as he said. So I'm really happy that everybody joined in. I'm really happy that we get to do this again. And if you have any questions that didn't make it in the live stream, you can send it to one of us or tune in next week and we'll be happy to answer it then. If you have any other questions and you want to speak with myself over here at Manitoba Music, my name is Alex Sani. I'm the Industry Development Coordinator here at Manitoba Music, and my email address is alex@manitobamusic.com. And if you want to know more about this series, you can check us out, manitobamusic.com/workshops, and that's going to take you to MusicWorks, and you're going to be able to see all about this. So now that ramble is done, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to say bye to these guys, and we'll see you all next week.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Right. Have a great time,
Have a good week, everyone.
See ya.